Well, I had to get a little creative in this last slide with some cutesy titles. Longinus, Is That You? And We Need to Talk. Matson and the other authors or editors of our primary text here all seem to think that this is the real Longinus. And certainly years ago, when I knew and talked with Marion Sousa and Phil Rollinson, they certainly thought, at least at that time, that this was Longinus. But there are a number of people who now believe very much that this was not a work by Longinus. In fact, it's a work that had to have been written earlier than Longinus. The sad thing is that they now kind of call this text either Longinus on the Sublime, because it was, discovered, a couple hundred years ago and still goes by that, or modern rhetoricians who are historians attribute this to a fellow that they call the pseudo Longinus. Sounds terrible that one's predecessor can be a phony. It seems a little odd and kind of unfair to say that a fellow who wrote years before Shakespeare is the fake Shakespeare. He didn't even know Shakespeare. How could he be a fake Shakespeare or a phony Shakespeare? Anyway, I think it's I think it's doing whoever this guy is very short shrift to call him the phony Longinus or the fake Longinus. He deserves to be called at least anonymous and not disparaged that way. That's another story, though. The great thing about this text, several great things about this text that we'll get to in class. The question he's asking here is, whence does oratory get its effectiveness? That's a really good question, and it's a question that has to go back, way back to Plato. And I'm surprised Plato doesn't really ask the question in quite this manner, or at least I'm unaware of that. In the Gorgias, in the Phaedrus, in everything that I've read, the Apology, all of this. Plato never quite asks that question. He asks a lot of other questions, but he doesn't ask that one, and that is what gives its effectiveness. He tries to tell us what it is, but he doesn't tell us what's its essential ingredients that makes it work. And of course, Longinus, and I'm going to call him Longinus anyway, because all the way back to the Renaissance, he was called Longinus. Maybe we call him Longinus the Elder. Um, his answer is it gets its power and its effectiveness from the sublime, which is a kind of a mystical power or force that has 5 sources, some of which are innate and some of which are learned. And that's a really interesting question because, of course, the sublime is that which is just beautiful. So on the one hand, you can look at the text and say the guy is really, really interested in beauty. He's interested in moving the audience, and so therefore maybe what he's talking about here is just this really long treatise on pathos, but it's not. If you look really carefully, that's not exactly what this is. He's talking about something more than just pathos, more than just emotionally moving the audience. He's talking about sort of psychologically subduing the hearer, mesmerizing them to some extent. That's no exaggeration. He talks about the goal of the speech should be to master the hearer, not simply to move them or to get them to change their minds, or it's clearly something that's not operating on a logical level. I don't think it's necessarily operating on an ethical level, and I don't think it's merely operating on an emotional level. So he's trying to get at something here, I think, that's deeper than the 3 modes that Aristotle's talking about. He's really talking about some sort of mystical connection. Makes him very much aligned with the sophists in that way. So we'll get to that when we get to. But look at all of those passages in there that I think are quite fascinating to that regard. Now, with respect to Menander, this is a very brief but curious little piece, actually. The manuscript, the photo of the manuscript there in the corner, is allegedly from the manuscript that was uncovered at Herculaneum. Herculaneum, of course, is the lesser-known town on the other side of Vesuvius that it too was wiped out when Pompeii was wiped out. It's just that people don't talk about Herculaneum as much, but it's there and it's not quite as famous. But it's been excavated just like Pompeii has, and when it was, this text was uncovered along with many others in the villa of someone we think was quite prominent and perhaps a student of Menander. We knew about Menander prior to this, but it's not the first time we ever heard of him. But we did not have this particular text, and what he's offering up here is sort of a brand new genre, I think. It's more of a disquisition. And we'll talk about this as well when we get into class. It's literary, it's private, it's non-adversarial. it's a different kind of discourse than what one is used to when you think of rhetoric, and yet he still applies the notions, the ideas, the aspirations that the pursuit of rhetoric entail to this very different type of text. It's meant to be written, and it's also meant to be engaged in orally. So there's this acknowledgement that it's not a mere speech. It's not something that's speech, but it's also something to be shared in terms of writing, back and forth, and so on. We'll see what you think about that because it's quite different. I haven't quite seen a genre like this. I don't think we have a modern day equivalent of it. Your text says something to the extent that well, it's kind of like the English essay. Not precisely, somewhat, yes, but not precisely. And so we'll try to nail down when we get into class what we think exactly it is.